You want your readers to love your story, to pick up your book, and be so immersed they won't be able to put it down. To do that, though, you need to have a great plot. But what is plot, and how do you craft one into a great story? In this video, we're going to talk about how plot works. I'm going to share a broad definition of plot, and then we'll dive into the approach that we use at the Right Practice called the Right Structure. You'll learn the 6 elements of plot that make stories entertaining and memorable. We'll look at a few examples, how these elements work in best-selling stories, and then we'll touch on story arcs and the different shapes that plot makes. And finally, you'll learn exactly how you can use all of these things to understand your plot in your own stories. Ready to get started? So first, what is plot? Here's a plot definition. Plot is a sequence of events in a story in which the main character is put into a challenging situation that forces them to make increasingly difficult choices. This drives the story toward a climactic event and resolution. Now, there's a difference between story and plot. A story is just an event. It's almost a recitation of facts. The mouse ate a cookie isn't a plot. It's a story. It's a cute story, but it's just a story. A plot requires cause and effect. The mouse ate a cookie and then asked for a glass of milk. That's a plot because it's causal. E.M. Forrester explains it like this. A plot is a narrative of events, the emphasis falling on causality. The king died and then the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is a plot. The time sequence is preserved, but the sense of causality overshadows it. Plot has a specific structure. It follows a format that sucks the readers in, that introduces characters, that has character development, and then compels readers to keep reading in order to satisfy conflict and answer questions. Plot is about cause and effect, but most importantly, plot is about choice. Plot is about a character's choice. In other words, it's not just a recitation of facts. The facts you include in your plot have purpose. They put a character into a situation where they have to make a decision. It pulls the story to its climax and conclusion. There are 6 elements of plot. These elements are the major events in a story, and they're essential in all creative writing, whether you're writing a novel or a screenplay, a memoir, a short story, or any other form. Even skilled writers who don't use these 6 elements intentionally are incorporating them into their writing subconsciously, because these are the things that brings movement, that brings conflict and action and life to stories. So what are the 6 elements? Let's start with the beginning, with the exposition. Exposition is at the beginning of a story. The exposition establishes characters and setting. It's where you have world building. It shows your readers what normal is for your characters. That way, when things start going wrong, your readers will have something to compare it to. The second element is the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the event in a story that throws the main character into a challenging situation. It upsets the status quo and begins the story's movement, either in a positive way or a negative way for the character. This movement is going to culminate in the climax and the denouement. Third, you have the rising action, also called the progressive complications. This is the largest part of a story. It's where most of the conflict takes place. There's this famous quote that you need to get your characters up a tree and then throw rocks at them and then bring them down. This is the rock throwing time. Here's where you raise the stakes and begin building the story to the climax. It's really crucial that your readers know what's at stake here. It's critical that they clearly understand the conflict. Next, you have the dilemma. This is sometimes called the crisis. This is the most important element in your plot. This is what you've been building toward. The moment when a character is put into a situation where they have to make an impossible choice. And that choice is going to pay off and really create the drama of the climax. Next, you have the climax. This is the big moment. The character's choice from the dilemma drives the outcome of this conflict. And if you do it right, this is the worst moment of tension in the whole story, which is really the best moment for your readers. And then finally, you have the denouement or the resolution. At the end of the story, you are reestablishing what normal looks like. This is the new normal. This incorporates all the changes and experiences that your characters had throughout the rest of the story. We get to see what the world looks like after going through all of that drama. This is a scene of closure with enough finality to deserve those two words, the end. So those are the 6 elements of plot. And the cool thing about those 6 elements is that they can make up your first 6 plot points when you're creating an outline. In fact, putting together an outline doesn't have to be complicated. All you need are 6 sentences, one for each of those 6 elements. Just by doing that, you'll have a strong outline to begin writing your story. Now, just as all stories have those 6 elements, they also all have plot types. Stories have been told for thousands of years, and as they've evolved, they've started to fall into patterns that we call plot types or story types. These types tend to be about the same underlying universal values, and they share similar structures, they share similar characters, and what Robert McKee calls obligatory scenes. There are 10 major plot types in stories: adventure, action, horror, thriller, mystery, love and romance, performance or sports stories, coming of age, temptation and morality, or a combination of some or all of those. Plot types are related to genre, but they also transcend genre. They've been consistent throughout history, dealing with these timeless universal values that are behind all stories. We go into detail on each of those plot types in our complete plot types guide, which we'll share the link of in the description. Plots have elements, they have types, but they also come in different shapes or arcs, story arcs. And these arcs can be visualized in a plot diagram. A plot diagram is a visual representation of a story on a graph or an axis. We have a full video on all of the story arcs, but here are 5 of the most common story arcs visualized in plot diagrams. The first is the rags to riches plot diagram. Rags to riches is one of the most basic plot diagrams. A character starts in a bad place, and then things get better and better throughout the story. Then you have the man in a hole story arc. In Man in a Hole, the main character starts out in a good place, but then they get into trouble. Then they get themselves out of it, and they finish the story with a happy ending. Building upon the Man in a Hole arc is the double Man in a Hole arc. This is one of the most popular shapes for stories. It appears in so many best-selling novels and blockbuster films. Like Man in a Hole, it begins with a character who's in a great place, but soon they get into trouble, they get themselves out of trouble, but they find themselves back in trouble again, and the character gets themselves back out of trouble and ends with a happy ending. Next, you have the Cinderella plot diagram. This is another story arc with a happy ending. It's especially popular in romantic comedies. You have a character, they start in a bad place, but then things start going well for them, but then there's a reversal of fortune. They reach their lowest of lows before finally getting themselves out of it again and ending with a happy ending. The last arc that I want to talk about is the Icarus story arc. This is the quintessential tragedy. Character starts in a bad place at the start of the story, but then things get better and better until finally there's a turning point, and all of a sudden everything that was going well starts going badly, and the story ends tragically. One of the biggest questions that I get is, can your story have more than one plot? And the answer is yes. Most great novels and films, if you dissect them, are made up not of just one story, but of 2 or 3 plots. You have the main plot, which contains most of the scenes in the story. Then you have the subplot, which deepens the story and adds another dimension. One of the most common types of subplots are love stories, which make up roughly 90% of subplots. And finally, you have the internal plot, which shows the development of the main character. Maybe they're growing more mature and selfless, or maybe they're becoming more selfish and immoral over the story. Let's look at an example of the plot elements at work in one of the most famous stories, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. So we start with the exposition. We're introduced to the Dursleys and especially to Harry, our protagonist. And things start off not very well for Harry. He's living under the stairs. The Dursleys are not very great people. He's having a hard time. Then you have the inciting incident. Harry gets a letter that we learn later accepts him into Hogwarts, an academy of magic. This sends the Dursleys into a fit. It causes Mr. Dursley to confiscate all of the letters. Next, you have the rising action, the progressive complications. This contains most of the conflict in the story. We meet Hagrid, who puts an end to the Dursleys' reign of terror. We go shopping for school supplies. We learn about Voldemort, the chief antagonist. We arrive at Hogwarts. There's a troll that's loose in the dungeon. Our heroes realize that all of these strange things that are happening in Hogwarts have to do with Voldemort, and they begin an investigation to what's really going on. Then you have the dilemma. The investigation makes Harry and his friends realize that the Sorcerer's Stone is in a dungeon, and they have to make a choice. Go try to get the Sorcerer's Stone and risk possible death and the chance that they will almost certainly be expelled from Hogwarts. Or do they turn back and allow Voldemort to capture the stone and return to full strength? It's a really hard choice. And then you have the climax. All of the conflict and the questions have led to this point. We see Harry and his friends show off all of the skills and things that they've learned over the course of the story. And they finally confront the antagonist, Voldemort, and his secret sidekick. Then you have the denouement. Harry wakes up in the hospital wing after facing Voldemort. Dumbledore wraps up a lot of loose ends. And Harry and his friends, instead of being expelled, are celebrated in front of the whole school. Finally, Harry goes home, back to the Dursleys, and Harry's new normal is established. So that's how the 6 elements of plot work in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But how do you use these 6 things in your plot? Here are a few simple questions that you can be asking about yourself for your story. For the exposition, ask yourself, what's normal at the beginning of this story? Remember, your character needs to grow and change. And the loss of this normal is part of the price that's paid for that change. So what does normal look like for your character? For the inciting incident, what kind of story are you telling? Each story type has unique ways to approach the inciting incident, and it's really good to be familiar with them. We have a whole guide on inciting incidents and how they relate to plot types that we'll share the link of in the description. For the rising action, what's at stake? What's the cost if your protagonist doesn't succeed? If you can't answer this, your reader won't be able to either. It needs to be built up enough for your reader to care. So set the stakes and then raise the stakes in your rising action. For the dilemma, question is, what impossible choice is your protagonist going to face? Will they have to choose between 2 bad things? For example, sacrifice themselves for the sake of a greater good, or to have self-preservation but risk losing the greater good? Or are they going to have a choice between 2 good things? For example, the choice between love or money. And what are the consequences of that choice? What will happen if that choice doesn't work out? For the climax, ask yourself, how does this all come to a head in the climax? This needs to emotionally be the crux of everything that you've built to. So how are you going to get everything together to have this moment of high action and intensity? And then for the denouement, what is the new normal at the end of this story? After the storm passes, after you've gone through all of that drama, what is normal going to look like for the characters? So that's a good overview for how plot works in your story. If you need more help on your plot, I have a new book called The Right Structure, which helps writers make their plot better and write books that readers love. You can check it out at therightstructure.com. We'll also have a link in the description. But now it's time to apply these ideas to your writing. So for this lesson, you actually have 2 options to practice this immediately. The first option is to create a 6-sentence plot outline for your story, using 1 sentence for each of the 6 elements that we talked about. Make sure you pay a special attention to the inciting incident and the dilemma. The second option that you have for your practice is to tackle your work in progress. So if you have a story that you're working on right now, take one of those elements of plot, whether it's exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, or denouement, and analyze how that works in your story. Set your timer for 15 minutes and go through one of those plot exercises that we talked about. And when you're finished with your practice, you can post it for feedback to our community of writers. We'll share the link in the description where you can post your practice for feedback. That's it for me. Happy writing, and we'll see you soon.